Well, President Joe Biden can't seem to get a break with voters, with a weak approval rating stuck around 40%. Rick Newman has one idea for how he can quickly become more popular. Rick, you have a direct line to the White House because, improved inflation certainly hasn't helped the president. What else
Unfortunately, I don't, but that allows me to, I guess, say whatever I want to say. I think President Biden's popularity would skyrocket if he would just announce his retirement. We have been talking about Biden's age all year. We're going to keep talking about it. You know, Mitt Romney said last week that he is not going to run for re-election when his current term expires. He's only 76 compared with 80 for Biden. And he said, you know, by the time my next term ends, if I ran for re-election, I'd be in my mid-80s, and that's too old. We need younger leaders in Washington. But Biden seems to think that it would be a defeat or some sort of admission of failure if he only ran for one term. I mean, I think this is giving retirement a bad name. What is wrong with retirement? I mean, look what happens in the private sector. I looked this up today. The average age of a CEO in the S&P 500, it's not in the 70s or the 80s. The average age of a CEO is 58. Many companies, publicly owned companies, have a mandatory retirement age, which is typically between 65 and 70. And yes, Warren Buffett is 93 and he's still CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, but it's his company. He built it. He can do whatever he wants. And he's obviously still doing a great job, and the shareholders want him there. We have a retirement problem in Washington, D.C., which is that nobody retires. We got politicians, especially in the Senate, who overstay their welcome. They do the same thing at the Supreme Court. Why doesn't Biden set an example and say, I am going to retire because it's the honorable thing to do, and I'm going to encourage younger people to the next generation of leaders to take over the Democratic Party? I don't think he's going to do it, but if he did, I think Americans would be grateful. And I think it might even make him a better former president in historical terms.
So, Rick, just so you know, I have no problems with retirement. I can't wait to retire, Rick. But don't
most Americans, like, they plan their whole lives to retire? What's wrong with these people in Washington? Anyway, go ahead, Josh.
I don't get it all. Rick, I'm with you. But let me ask you this question. Let's say Democratic Party leaders, they take your advice. They say to President Biden, listen, we're looking at the numbers. It doesn't look good, Mr. President. You got to step down. Who do you think kind of picks up the torch? I mean, who is the viable candidate? Is it the vice president? Is it Governors Newsom or Shapiro? Who do you think?
Well, this is the obvious conundrum for Democrats is they don't think they have a good understudy waiting in the wings to replace President Biden. Kamala Harris ran a poor campaign for president, her own presidential campaign in 2020, and she has not distinguished herself as vice president. She might come out of it. She might turn out to be a better presidential candidate in 2024. But, you know, we could have, I mean, the clock is ticking here, and we're almost out of time for Democrats to actually do this. But if we had an open race, there are some viable Democrats. It doesn't have to be whoever's in the White House right now. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, he might be too liberal for a lot of Americans, and he'd have to explain away $7 gasoline prices in California. I think that would be hard. But this is also a self-defeating argument. If you say, well, we should keep the old guy in as young as possible because we don't think there's any viable fresh blood. Well, guess what? You're not going to develop your next generation of leaders. I mean, in institutions that study leadership, such as some corporations, the U.S. military does this. I mean, it's well understood that you need to cultivate new leaders by letting them lead. You don't say you have to stay forever in the shadow of the institution's eminence and wait until that person dies in order to get your chance at leadership. So, we are in a situation in the Democratic Party. And by the way, same problem in the Republicans. Donald Trump is 77. So if Biden weren't so old, then Democrats would be able to say the Republican candidate is too old. Maybe if the Democrats had somebody who was in their 50s, imagine that, they could say, hey, we got youth on our side. It's the Republicans running the old man, not us.